Hi everyone, it's Josh Kepkay here with Vancouver Real Estate today, and really cool conversation today. I have Professor Aragon. She is a political science professor from University of Victoria who specializes in issues of race, of gender, of all these identity politics, which are really hot button issues in society right now. And she was actually my professor years ago at the University of Victoria. So I thought really great person, especially being also an American, to talk about how some of the race, ethnicity, and these kind of politics of identity intersect with real estate. Because here in Vancouver, you may not know, but a lot of this scratches beneath the surface in that titles to certain areas of like titles for properties in certain areas historically, and they still are there today, say you can't buy this piece of land if you're of Chinese descent or a person of color, though we don't, all that stuff is kind of vetoed and moot right now. And so people can still buy it, but it's de facto there in some other ways. So I thought we'll just have a little bit of a conversation around these issues today to shed some light and perspective. So without any further ado, that's a long intro. Welcome, Prof. A, and maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself if I haven't covered it.
So here's the thing, homeowners, homebuyers, investors, we all want to find that perfect property to move into and to eventually sell for profit. And we want to make that purchase in a place with affordable, safe, quality homes, communities, and businesses. Why? So we can actually enjoy our lives, take vacations, and spend the quality time we want with the people we love. How do we do all this without risking a fortune and running ourselves ragged? That's the big question, and this show is dedicated to the answer.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for having me, Josh. I really do appreciate it. And yes, if you want the inside scoop about Josh Kepkay, Google me and I'll tell you everything. That's just joking. I am
That's
a political
scary.
scientist by training. I've been the director of the Technology and Society program now for, I want to say, 6 years. So a lot of my most recent work and courses kind of melds my political science and interdisciplinary background with technology, identity politics, and that sort of thing. And what precipitated this discussion that we're going to have today was really the social media response to protests, Black Lives Matter, and that sort of thing, and looking at how some of the social media response was a little bit of clicktivism in terms of people just liking something or sharing it, and then perhaps for some of them washing their hands of any other sort of action. And so Josh reached out and said, let's have a conversation about race and housing. And I really applaud this want for a meaningful discussion because particular to the United States, and I do think this happens in Canada as well, is redlining in terms of not allowing certain people to live in particular areas, or financial redlining with banks not giving good loans, let's say for condos or homes, to people of color. And there's a history of this taking place. And frankly, some of the gated communities that we find in North America are gated in order to keep certain people out. And it might be a combination of classism and racism. So yeah, I look forward to this discussion, Josh.
You know what? I think that's a really great term. Was it called redlining?
Yes, redlining.
Yes, I had heard a podcast on the New York Times Daily, or maybe it was something put out by them that had shown how down in the south of the U.S. There's some black farmers essentially, and they this one gentleman, the bank, like everything you could imagine was done to make sure he couldn't get this loan. They would delay the loan. They would put all this extra kind of red tape around him, and it ended up with his family, him losing his whole family's acreages and farms. And this guy was like the best farmer there was. He'd won all these awards, but these kind of systemic and systematic issues or processes had kind of stacked up against him, and they lost everything, and his father even ended up dying just from all of
The
the
stress
way
and what have
this,
you.
yeah, to make this farm work, because they would be working obscene amount of hours trying to just beat the crunch. So that's one example in the US, and as I'm saying, for Canada and Vancouver particularly, whether it be notations on a title that say you can't buy this if you're of a certain ethnicity, or and then single family zoning, which limits the amount of people that can get it, because you need obscene amount of financial means to get to it. So what are some examples of this, that because you're a little bit more, have your finger on the pulse for these issues than I am at these days? What are you seeing out there?
Well, I think one of the things that happens with housing in particular is the vacancy rates are so excruciating low where we both live. I'm on the island in Victoria, in Saanich in particular, and you're in Vancouver, and it is a seller or landlord market.
Mm-hmm.
And so people can be very choosy of who they want to live in their condos. For instance, one of my friends who's a leader at UVic has had to deal with someone in her strata who doesn't like, quote unquote, ethnic food smells, and will walk around the condo units literally smelling, and does not have an affinity for spicy food. And so when someone's making curry or something else, it's in the minutes, the complaints. And, I've talked to this colleague, and I won't name her because I don't have her permission. Uh, but she has told me that it feels classist and racist, because what this person is really doing, this person has no issue with cabbage, pierogies, that sort of thing, but seems to not like spicy food. And, the strata's having to deal with her consistent complaints, yet I don't believe anyone has called out this woman for what really is her racism among other condo owners. And what I've seen from my students, Josh, in terms of renters is, especially students of color of mine, who've been told repeatedly, oh yeah, we know who you are. You're the renters in the neighborhood. And this group of students happen to be Indigenous. And so they really felt that sting when they were walking their dog or doing stuff. They were always referred to as the renters. And, they said it was, they looked their nose down at us. And so there's different ways in our communities that we can make people feel comfortable or uncomfortable.
I think the strata one is a really great example, because some folks come into a strata with a sense of entitlement, and I think that's an example of it. And to think that it's going to be your way or the highway, and when you come into a multifamily environment, you have to accept that kind of stuff and make some compromises. And if you're not going to do that, and you're going to start, and a strata council can be, a very powerful governing body. They can make your life very miserable. I have gotten on the wrong side of the strata a couple times, just with someone either complaining about dog being off the leash or parking and not outside of the lines. And you have to be very mindful, because it's not cheap, the fines, and it's really frustrating to get these letters that say like, hey, someone's made this complaint and we're gonna charge you this much, and then you have to go defend yourself. And generally you can get off of the hook from it pretty easily, but it's a time crunch, it's a time suck, and not everyone has the time to make those appointments to go and meet with the strata, especially if you're someone, maybe a little bit lower on the socioeconomic ladder, and you're working 2 jobs, 3 jobs, 4 jobs in some cases in Vancouver. You're not going to be able to make a strata council meeting,
Well, and what happens if your English isn't very good or you have an accent? And so
Yeah.
I do think, Josh, that the strata, when people complain about, loud Bollywood music or whatever in the heck it might be, and I just throwing these examples out, and they're examples that I've heard before, like, oh, we bought this house and we had to repaint it. It looked like a scene from a Bollywood movie. And my response was, oh, I love Bollywood movies, to the confusion of the parent that said that. So the strata councils need to become more firm with these gaslighting people of color in terms of smells of food they don't like and music, having to note that it's perhaps rap music or Bollywood music or something to that effect, and just shoot that down and say, I appreciate your comment, but have you reflected on the problematic nature of your comment, singling out another ethnic background? This person might clutch their pearls and say, oh, no, I'm not racist. And say, well, you're not complaining about your other next door neighbor who's listening to country music. And there's lots of people of color who listen to country music. One thing that I do want to say, and this is just a quick little thing for anyone who's watching, I had a few technical difficulties, and maybe it's just Zoom fatigue, so I'm using an image instead of live video. What stinks, because I got a haircut. I mean, I timed this for cut and color. I'm, yes, cue Carly Simons, you're so vain.
You send me a selfie and I'll use it for the
well, then I have to take a
thumbnail.
But I guess I can turn off my ring light now. But in all seriousness, after that moment of levity, when people are looking for places to live, and this is going to increase, this summer, because I'm sure, well, you could speak to this when people are buying houses more. I was really thinking of people renting, like lots of students coming back to the province or the mainland Victoria because of courses resuming in the fall. One of the things that I have heard, and I'm sympathetic to landlords a little bit about college students because they think that there's going to be keggers and parties, that sort of thing. But the ways in which, some landlords only want graduate students and not undergrads. I know they're trying to protect their property, but I've had in my 15 years at UVic students who are camping or couch surfing because they cannot find affordable, safe accommodations. So that's an issue as well. Or, they think they're in for a place and then they go with their, possible other housemates, and they have tattoos, dreadlocks, and they can see the landlord kind of react to, you two aren't clean cut. So there's lots of ways that classism, racism, and other isms are at play with housing in British Columbia and elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. How about, because I know you have lots of colleagues down in the States and across different academic institutions, and I think places like San Francisco and California, there's super tight housing crunch, and some of these issues kind of are a little bit more visible. I'm wondering, have you heard any interesting anecdotes from down there that might be relevant?
Yeah. My best friend lives in the Bay Area, and she's lived there for about almost a decade now. And, when they bought their home in a suburb, she thought it would be their starter home. But things are so expensive, Josh, that this is their forever home. With the Google campus and LinkedIn, et cetera, all the big tech companies, so many of the people there can, throw down $2 million for a bungalow and very quickly with cash. And so it's impossible for so many to buy into that particular market. When we have like a real estate crash, typically the Bay Area and beach communities on the West Coast are not affected. It's usually inland where you see people being affected in terms of being upside down with their house or their condo. And let me just explain that. I know you know what it means, but maybe some of your listeners don't.
Please.
The upside down is when you owe more on your house than what it's worth. The market might have been really good initially, and you've made, $250,000 on your house over 3-5 years. I'm thinking California because this happens. Well, this happened to us in San Diego County twice. And then the market crashes, and suddenly your mortgage is more than what the house is currently worth. Thankfully, that never happened to us in San Diego County, but I have family and friends, Josh, that walked away from their homes literally in the middle of the night, moved out because they were upside down in such a bad way that they just walked away from their house. And I can recall visiting my parents in Riverside County, in the last 2 decades, and taking a walk or running around their neighborhood, and every third house had a poster or notice on the lawn noting foreclosure, a bank foreclosure. And one of the issues with this, with the crash of the market, 10, 15 years ago, is so many of the folks that were given terrible loans ended up being people of color, in particular Black women in the US. So housing and the rates for borrowing seem to be in such a way that some folks have kind of a color, or dare I say, for people of color, disincentive for loans, and the balloon mortgages or ways in which some of these folks are approved for loans affects them worse when the economy goes in the can. And, I'm just thinking of the last decade. There's a history of this in terms of integration and segregation, both in the US and Canada, with housing. So, these are really basic things to think about. And, I applaud people for making their avatars Black, but there's more that they can do, as a renter or landlord, or as part of a strata, in terms of being a good ally to people of color.
So I want to tease this out a bit more, but before that, maybe what do you think people can do to be a better ally in a strata or as a landlord?
Well, I'm thinking let's go with the strata first. When people file complaints consistently against one person, I mean, for all we know, maybe someone with your strata doesn't like your dog, doesn't like, that you're young and successful. It could be ageism against you. I don't know. But for, the example that I gave of my friend, it's clear that this person that walks around sniffing at people's doors, I mean, can you believe this? And seems to complain about savory, odoriferous food more so than anything, but never about someone's stinky cabbage soup. And also, loud so-called ethnic music. There's some racism going there.
So would you say it's calling them out?
And saying, you seem to be complaining about this particular family lots, and they're down the hall from you. They're, you don't share walls. Do you have a bias against them? And for landlords, just think about the ways in which they eschew certain people from renting from them. Tattoos are so prevalent today, and for someone to use that as a reason not to rent to someone, that's a problem. For instance, I've had students in particular say, I've had to go in with long sleeve shirts, when I'm looking for housing. I only want to work somewhere that is fine with my piercings or tattoos. So people can discriminate in, unfortunately, a lot of different ways, Josh, be it racism, ageism, classism, that sort of thing. Now with loans, there's been lots of research, family going in for a loan, and the loan is better for the white family than it is for the mixed race family, or a Black family, that sort of thing. And so the banks and lending agencies certainly need to work on this. So they think about the ways in which they treat clients, potential clients.
How does that
Also,
happen? How does a white family end up with a better loan than a family of color?
well, one of the things that I would suggest is that this is related. Look at the hashtag Black in the Ivory with African American, Black Canadians, Caribbean, Afro, Latina, Latino, Latinx people, noting the way in which they're treated. And, going to buy a mattress and being told it's really expensive. Are you aware of that?
Yeah.
This whole thing like, can you really afford this
Mm.
item, this house? Different ways in which we're taught to believe, like, do you belong here? An African American woman being asked to refill someone's coffee at a department meeting, someone thinking that she is the secretary or note taker when she's actually the new associate professor.
Mm-hmm.
And so these stories that are shared about academia, some have shared their stories about looking for housing. And I'm thinking of a colleague who's looking for a house in North Carolina right now, and she's had a few fall through, and it's when they meet her. She's
Mm.
dark-skinned, African American, prolific author, that sort of thing. She's now at the point in which she's like, do I have to meet some of these sellers? Can I just have my proxy, the real estate agent?
Interesting that she has to meet them. Like, we wouldn't do that here. Buyers and sellers rarely, if ever, meet.
I know, and she's shared a few of these stories that kind of makes you shake your head. I don't know if it's been that she's doing the final walkthrough and they're leaving and then they see her. I don't think it was a sit down, Josh. It was just
Yeah, yeah.
accidental.
They just come to their attention. That's so interesting because here, we all, I wouldn't want to say we all, that's the definitely not what I want to walk that back right now. There was anyway in 2016 this sense of like China is buying up everything in our neighborhood, and there would be a very, people would be upset, but everybody's money's green, and they would still take the biggest buck. It doesn't matter where it's coming from, right? And
Yeah.
so that point it could get overlooked. But I guess you can be more choosy in a seller's market as a seller, as you were saying. I think what I would love to reach back, step back and touch on though is the financial crisis, because as you were saying, the loans were getting handed out. What do we call them? No money. I can't remember exactly how it went, but it was basically, no money up front and we're going to give you this mortgage. But so people buying these houses, and generally in these economic downturns, as we're seeing right now with the global coronavirus pandemic, is the people that are disproportionately affected are the low to middle income earners, which we know are overrepresented by those more minority groups. So in the case of 08, 09, those are the first people to lose their homes, and then who's coming in to purchase those homes is in the case of that, it was like a big company, I can't remember, Black something or whatever, and so they bought all these single family homes, and now those are investment vehicles that were then fractionalized and turned into the equivalent to stocks, which pension funds then bought. And what happens to these families who've now lost those homes? They are moving, like, where do they end up in can you help me tease this thought through and say what happens to them as a result of this?
Well, one of the things that we've witnessed in the US and Canada is the increased houselessness, or the unhoused or homeless, whichever word you'd like to use here, Josh. And I think this is part of it. And the other thing that I want to speak to is racism with Airbnb. And how people have found that when they have used their real image and not, an avatar of some sort, there's no issue. And then they end up paying, and somehow this person maybe Googles them, that sort of thing, and it's suddenly not available.
So you're saying once the people, like if they don't have their picture up as their profile, but then the person who's got the property sees who the person is now. Oh, sorry, we actually aren't available this weekend. You can't.
Right,
Mm.
right. And so I can't remember the name of the company, but a group of African American entrepreneurs started a competitor to Airbnb. Gosh, it's on the tip of my tongue. But that said, they started a competitor to Airbnb for African Americans in the
Mm.
U.S. because of
Wow.
racism within Airbnb. And frankly, over the years, the last couple of years, I should say, I've seen more stories about Southeast Asian families or couples, mixed race couples, suddenly having issues with a potential Airbnb property or getting a negative response when they cleaned everything. And the only thing they could think of is, wow, we're Asian. We didn't even cook there. And they're making a comment
Mm.
about us and the smell, that we must have cooked something and we didn't cook.
So what do we do? What do we do beyond putting up a black square on our social media feed for a day? What's something tangible that people can do to, I find that exercise of unpacking the privilege backpack really valuable, and that's what I've been talking to a lot of people about.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic example, Josh. Peggy McIntosh's Unpacking the Privilege knapsack or backpack is such a good exercise to really think about power and privilege. For your viewers who aren't familiar with this, this is really thinking about asking questions. Where I live in my neighborhood, do I see other people like me? And I'd like to move this not just to race, but color, size, ethnic background, immigration status, your friend group. Some of the questions are, were you taken to museums? Were you told that you were loved? This sort of thing. Your listeners/viewers can Google this, but really to start in your mind in a room and think about how many steps forward you would be able to take. Like, for
Mhm.
instance, when I walk into a classroom, I know that I have education privilege, and by that, class privilege. I'm also heterosexual, married to a white man, so I come in with certain privileges, albeit juxtaposed with the fact that I'm first generation college student for my bachelor's degree, let alone my advanced degrees. So unpacking that privilege knapsack is really a useful exercise to think about one's privilege, especially for white people who may feel right now with all of these discussions a sense of white liberal guilt,
Mhm.
lowercase l, not the Liberal Party, in terms of, I'm not racist, I haven't done this. I used to hear in the US when I taught American politics, I'd always have a student in my office at some point in the term angry or crying saying, I didn't own slaves, why can't Black people get over it? I'd be calm and say, I understand, but we're all complicit in power and privilege. And these discussions in class aren't meant to attack you, but really it's okay to be uncomfortable with the conversations. What are you going to learn from this? How are you going to move forward with this knowledge? And so one of the things good allies can do besides the Peggy McIntosh exercise is listen, read, educate oneself. And here's a big one. I'm Latina, I'm exuberant, gregarious, a very much strong extrovert. And one of the things that I wish allies would do is believe people of color.
Mhm.
When we say that we've been followed around in a store, or that someone says hello to all the white customers and not to us, believe it. Don't
Yeah,
dismiss it
it's
or
hard to
say,
hear it. I think for some people, we can
yeah,
listen, but can we actually hear it? And it is challenging. I think that's where the
huh,
reading and learning is really instructive, and that's why I shared some of those novels that I had read to as a way
Good.
for people to maybe access those stories.
Right, right. I think it's important to be willing to be uncomfortable as you learn. I mean, one of the things I was really frustrated with, Josh, on my Instagram feed is seeing a lot of so-called allies responding to what's going on and really making it about them.
Mm.
You know, I took note who was kind of navel gazing and who was sharing resources and who was doing a little bit more. Is that judgmental of me? Maybe, maybe.
You're human.
True. I still have a heartbeat. So being a good ally, um, you know, is listening, being an advocate. The next time someone makes a gaslight sort of comment at a strata meeting, to call them on it.
Mm.
Now, this doesn't mean that you're going to fight all the time, but for instance, if you know you're in a grocery store and you see someone who's different from you and you have your mask on, smile. Your eyes usually smile. Just be nice. Be a good witness for others.
Yeah.
That's part of it too. I mean, because you can bet if I'm, you know, in Dairy Queen, let's say, with my kids, and the person in front of me is having issues, and, you know, it could be their accent, this sort of thing. I'm the type to intervene and help.
Mm.
Also, the type to intervene and help when I see someone being mistreated. And I need, sometimes it hasn't been safe for me to do that.
Yeah.
When I'm with my kids, I'm definitely a little bit more careful. But intervene if it's safe for you, if you see someone being mistreated. But again, be careful with that.
Mm-hmm. I think we've seen a lot of examples of people, well, maybe not a lot, but I've seen some in the news anyway, of people intervening with cases of racist comments on a SkyTrain in Vancouver against maybe an Asian couple or something like that. So it doesn't always happen, but it's nice to see when it does. What you know, I don't want to. We could probably talk for a long time, given that I studied this stuff with you for a fair stretch. Is there anything you want to maybe leave off with? I want to share a little book. I'm just going to do it right now. And you should probably check this out. Land of Destiny is a book that came out earlier this year in Vancouver by Jesse Donaldson, and it's a history of Vancouver real estate. And it really shows how, I'll just read off the back, it really examines the backroom dealings, the skullduggery, the nepotism, the racism, and the obscene profiles of people in Vancouver real estate from the get-go, while at the same time revealing that the same forces really made Vancouver what it is, the speculation, global capital. They're the same ones that are shaping it today. So I found this to be a really good read to just show you how.
Land of Destiny?
Land of Destiny.
I'm going to look for it.
Yeah, it was a quick read. It was really good, and it'll just give you a sense of how all this really privilege and closing off of ranks and limiting access is really what's got us to where we are right now. But yeah, anything you want to leave us off with before we wrap it up?
Well, you know, it's not that I know you're not asking for a cookie, so to speak, but I just want to thank you. And I applaud you for reaching out and you know, our private message on Instagram, really commenting on these cheap, easy ways to demonstrate support compared to more impactful ways. So thank you for inviting me to chat with you about this, but also for caring about impactful ways to be a good ally. Because this is an example, Josh, of you being a good ally. And again, I know, you know, you didn't want a cookie for this, but I want to say thank you for being a good ally.
Oh, appreciate that. Yeah, I just got, you know, a little fired up after some conversations and said, you know, I need to talk to you about this and just do a segment. It's timely and I'll do something on my own. So yeah, it was a privilege and always good to catch up with you and hear stuff. So maybe we'll leave it there. If you want to find out more about what Professor Aragon, Prof A, has got going on in all her works, you're probably on every social media platform out there, but what's the best way to kind of track with you?
Probably Twitter or LinkedIn. LinkedIn is very professional. Twitter is me and all the force of me.
And what are and what are you known as on Twitter?
So it's just my name, Janni Aragon. So it'd
Yeah.
be at JANNIARAGON.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And I'll put that in the field that allows me to do that for this wherever it's supposed to go. So thank you so much. We'll leave it at there. And we're at a safe social distance here from Vancouver to the island, so people know. And
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, and you take care.
Vancouver Real Estate Today explores the art of living through genuine storytelling and localized expertise. If you enjoy what we do here, do us a favor and write us a review, and visit us at vancouverrealestatetoday.ca and discover the home that lets you express and live who you are.